Hey y'all, what is up? Keasbey here, and today we're going to be comparing and contrasting three different cards that are all filling a really similar niche right now. And those are Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, and Enemy Controller. But before we get into all that, don't forget to drop this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more. Okay, so this actually was birthed from my most recent Floowandereeze deck profile, but I wanted to pull back and look at these three cards in a wider context than just within Floowandereeze. That said, let's look at all these cards from the top down. First, all three are quick plays, none of which have a once per turn attached to them. Starting off with Book of Moon, simple. Target one monster on the field, flip it into face down defense position. Clean and easy. Next up, Book of Eclipse. A little bit more reading here. Flip all monsters on the field into face down defense position. Then, during the end phase of the turn, flip all monsters your opponent controls back into face up defense position, and they draw a card for each monster flipped face up by this effect. And last, for those of you who don't quite do literature, we have Enemy Controller. We actually have two effects on here. First, target a face up monster your opponent controls, change its battle position. Second effect, tribute a monster you control, target a face up monster your opponent controls, take control of it until the end of the turn. And before anyone mentions it, we will not be talking about Book of Lunar Eclipse. I think this is a pretty lackluster card, given that it not only has a discard cost, but it must target two monsters, or Sol and Luna, which, while I think this card might have a home somewhere, it isn't generically relevant to what we're going to be talking about in this video. So to overgeneralize a little bit, the three mentioned cards are seeing use in three main categories: defensively going first, offensively going first, and offensively going second. So let's tackle situation one. Basically, Book of Moon is an answer to targeted negations such as Imperm, Veiler, or Ghost Mourner. You summon a monster, activate its effect, your opponent decides nope, fires off Imperm, you respond with a Book of No, and use Book of Moon to flip your monster face down. Chain resolves, Chainlink 3, Book flips your monster face down, Chainlink 2, Imperm resolves without effect since its target is now flipped face down, and Chainlink 1, your effect goes off. Pretty simple and effective. I do want to go on a quick aside for a moment, as this has occurred a shocking number of times, and I want to just make a quick PSA about it right here and now. A negated monster flipped face down will forget that it is negated. What is the scenario here? Well, let's play it out. Normal summon Rabina, activate her effect. My opponent Veilers. Okay, fine by me, we've got Book of Moon on Chainlink 3. But Chainlink 4? Bam, Imperm. So what happens here? Before I say anything, I really hope the answer is obvious to all y'all watching, but again, this has come up more than once and has caused confusion. Chain resolves. Chainlink 4, infinite impermanence will negate Rabina. Now Chainlink 3, Rabina, while it is negated, is now flipped face down by Book of Moon. Chainlink 2, Veiler is going to resolve without effect since Rabina is now face down. And on Chainlink 1, since Rabina is flipped face down, she has forgotten that she was negated and resolves perfectly fine on Chainlink 1. This quote-unquote forgetting you're negated when flipped face down bit will come up a little bit later in this video as well, so just keep it in mind. Okay, so Book of Eclipse at a glance sounds like it acts the exact same way here, just with no targeting. But we're gonna alter the scenario a little bit. Let's keep you in the realm of Floowandereeze. So we've talked before about how if you summon Rabina, your opponent goes to Impermit. Well, now instead you have Book of Eclipse. Okay, basically the exact same outcome here. Rabina goes face down, you summon Eaglin and move on with your turn. Let's pose an altered scenario though. You summon Rabina, no response. You move on to summoning Eaglin, and now your opponent decides to interact. Well, Book of Moon is a really simple fix here. Flip the Eaglin face down, summon Empen. Now, what we didn't mention before, because it was very Floowandereeze specific, is that whatever you flipped face down is going to go to the graveyard instead of the Banish Zone, so it can't be recovered. Also, kind of crazy that Banish Zone doesn't have a proper name like Graveyard does. Now, because we Book of Moon when we Tribute Summon, we only recover one bird here, but that's fine, we can make moves with just one. But Book of Eclipse is a dicier endeavor here. Same setup, Rabina has resolved, and it's Eaglin time now. Now Imperm on Eaglin, we either protect with Book of Eclipse, or Eaglin gets negated, and we are dependent on the rest of our hand. If we have no follow-up and we have to use Book of Eclipse, both of our birds are going to end up in the graveyard, meaning no recovery, meaning even further that if we don't have either a Rabina or Eaglin in hand, or a very specific set of cards, we can assume we don't have Advent by the way, as we're protecting the birds with books here, we're kind of done. So let's expand this out of the realm of birds and talk cats. Let's say you summon a Pearly, then summon Purrely, the bigger priority hit for your opponent most likely. You could always Book of Moon Purrely and then have Pearly available for other plays, but with Book of Eclipse, both flip face down, so while Lily will resolve, you're now down a Pearly you would otherwise have had if you were playing Book of Moon. So while Book of Eclipse can yield the exact same results defensively on turn 1 as Book of Moon, it can also complicate your situation more so than Book of Moon would. You may notice we've spent a lot of time talking about the books and haven't mentioned Enemy Controller yet. While in this going first scenario, Econ is pretty much dead unless your opponent makes it live by summoning something on your turn. Now, this isn't to say it's impossible, and it can potentially be the strongest of these in some scenarios, since you are not only tributing your monster to dodge a target negate, but you're also refreshing a resource for any generic plays you may have later on in a way that your flipped down monster can't fill. So for this first category, I personally think Book of Moon is the clear winner. It offers the most flexibility in use, and you don't have to be concerned about blanking the rest of your field if your opponent interacts mid-combo. While Enemy Controller is potentially stronger, it does require your opponent to set you up to use it, so I wouldn't really consider it if your priority is turn 1 protection. Also, a fun quirk regarding Book of Eclipse that I couldn't really think of a better place to mention is that it can actually be negated by Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and that is regardless of if your opponent has a monster on the field or not when it's activated, because the possibility of something hitting the field before Book of Eclipse resolves, creating the draw scenario, always exists at the time of activation, similar to how, regardless of board state, Should All Fusion can be ashed because the possibility of sending from deck to graveyard at resolution always exists at the time of activation. Something major that is worth mentioning here as well is that neither book can protect your Link monsters, as they cannot be flipped face down. So let's move on to case study number 2. You went first, didn't need to do anything. So we're going to assume a basic board setup here with 2 points of interaction on your side of the field. Feels pretty average. Book of Moon again is going to be the simplest one in this scenario. As soon as you see your opponent hit a choke point in their combo, you can go ahead and fire off Book of Moon on it. Just an aside, flipping a monster face down is a remarkably powerful form of quote-unquote removal. While it can still be tributed for a tribute summon or used as fusion material, it cannot be used as Link, ignoring one very specific case, Synchro, or Xyz material. Additionally, anything that requires specific typing or naming may be unable to interact as well. Book of Eclipse at a glance may feel like the strongest choice here, but you come to my channel for me to nitpick at cards, and that's what we're gonna do. So you have no board state, then yes, it is a simpler equation here. However, because Book of Eclipse flips your own monsters face down, you have to consider the utility of waiting until you've used your onboard interactions before eclipsing, or if it's more worth it to eclipse and not use them that turn. Again, it may seem minor, but it can and has come up with me more with is it worth blanking Empen's Floodgate than anything else. Additionally, considering how much damage those end phase draws can do is important, as if you want to maximize the Eclipse, there'll likely be 2 or 3 monsters on your opponent's field, meaning 2 or 3 draws if you can't clear them. Something else important is that while your opponent's monsters will flip face up during the end phase, yours will not, meaning that they are blanked until you can return them back up manually during your own main phase. Enemy Controller is an interesting pick here. I think it sits somewhere between the two so far as flexibility and use. Let's make a simple board of X-Pearly Noir and Kashtira Fenrir. While Book of Moon would allow you to snipe something early and save your monster effects, and Book of Eclipse you would ideally burn your monster effects first, then use it, Enemy Controller kind of acts as a middle ground. You could use the Fenrir here, then before committing the Noir activations, use Enemy Controller, tribute the spent Fenrir, and take a material from your opponent. As powerful as flipping something down is, taking it is generally even stronger, provided they can't steal it back later on. Enemy Controller also can be used to force through an interaction while taking a resource. For example, if you use your Fenrir and your opponent attempts to hit it with a targeted negation, you can always chain Enemy Controller, tribute the Fenrir, blanking their negation, and then taking something on field afterwards. Something that I will mention regarding the books, though, that Enemy Controller cannot do. Let's say you have a 4 material X-Pearly Noir and your opponent negates it preemptively. Now they have a tuner and a non-tuner. You could Book of Moon the tuner, or you can, on Chainlink 1 and 2, use Noir to attempt to spin them both into the deck. Now, Noir at the moment is negated, but we can use our own Book of Moon on her here on Chainlink 3. So now she'll flip face down, forget that she's negated, and resolve chain links 1 and 2. This unfortunately does not work with Enemy Controller since Attributed Noir will still remember that she is negated, and obviously of course this doesn't just work with Expertly Noir, but wanted to use her as a great example of this. So for this scenario, it's not as clear cut. My personal take is a toss-up between Book of Moon and Enemy Controller. I think Book of Moon again takes the win overall for flexibility and usage. Enemy Controller, however, can be an absolute power play, but requires a bit more specific timing. I will mention for the Floowandereeze crew, Enemy Controller gets bonus points here as tributing a small bird not only replaces itself as tribute material with whatever you take with Econ, but additionally the tributed bird can then act as a chain block later in the turn if need be. So far as all of this goes generically, I do think a little bit of this is going to come down to specific deck choice and personal preference between flexibility and power plays. Book of Eclipse I think is also a solid choice here, but it's my least favorite of the three. Obviously the draw effect and it being negatable by Ash are a factor, but the main factor is how it interacts with your own board, meaning that you are kind of forced to potentially play into TTT or the other TTT. All that said, if your board is preemptively broken or well established and flipping your own board isn't an issue, Eclipse for sure offers a very strong blanket option with the bonus of not targeting. And at that point, better to give your opponent some draws for the chance of rebounding next turn than to lose outright. And now for the last scenario, going second into a board. So again, it is important that I mention here that both of our books do nothing against link monsters. So starting with Book of Moon again, simplest and easiest. You can target something like a Baronne de Fleur and either force its negation early or blank it out for the turn. Either way, it's a 1-for-1 trade with a negation. This situation is where Book of Eclipse shines. Now, obviously, if we're looking at a board with multiple Omni negates, it's going to pan out the exact same way as Book of Moon. But if we look at a board with different types of interaction, or a board that has monster-centric negation only, Book of Eclipse is going to blank everything, and now because you're firing it off at the beginning of your turn, you have ample chance to clear out your opponent's monsters, or at least flip them face up by attacking them so that they don't result in draws for your opponent. I am going to divert for a second time though and say if your only concern here is going second into a board, Dark Ruler No More fills this niche significantly better than Book of Eclipse, as Dark Ruler No More cannot be interacted with, but obviously it doesn't have any of the other utility that we have been talking about all throughout this video. Now, Enemy Controller is the interesting one here, and I think this one comes down more to deck specific. For example, I really like Enemy Controller going second for Floowandereeze specifically because again, in the face of a targeted negation, it 1. Protects your bird by tributing them for cost, 2. Replaces the bird with your opponent's monster as tribute fodder, and 3. Turns the tributed bird for cost into a chain block for later in the turn. That said though, Enemy Controller going into a board is definitely the most situational of the three. There are boards where this is going to be an absolute power play, but again, it is the least flexible of the three in this situation. So for going second into a board, I have to give the edge to Book of Eclipse here outside of some very niche situations. So that is our 3 cards in the 3 different scenarios that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to present them in this way so you can decide for yourself based on all this information what you should be playing. I think overall you get the most flexibility out of Book of Moon, and it's what I'm personally using in both Floowandereeze and Pearly at the moment. Enemy Controller does, however, have a special place in my heart, and I have both seen Pearly decks running it, and I was running it myself in a much more going second theme Floowandereeze deck, but I think for a deck that wants to go first, Book of Moon, while not always as powerful, will give you the most flexibility in use. And honestly, Book of Eclipse, while remarkably strong in the right situation, I find to be deceptively situational for a card that seems so easy to use, but don't sleep on it as a going second option with utility for going first as well. Also, I'm testing it out in Memento and really liking it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for even more, and I will catch you all later.